This episode of the Tony Robbins podcast is brought to you by Breakthrough, the mobile app with the tools and strategies you need to take your life to the next level. Imagine that Tony Robbins himself was your life coach, and you had direct access to his most powerful ideas and proven tactics whenever you want, wherever you want, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Introducing the Tony Robbins Breakthrough app. Whether you're looking to improve your finances, your career, your health, your relationships, or even just the way you feel every day, the Tony Robbins Breakthrough app is your key to real, lasting change in your life. Breakthrough is a digital library of Tony's best content, a curated collection of some of his most watched short videos like What Makes a Relationship Work and How to Master the Game of Money. And when you're ready for deeper immersion, you can purchase digital copies of Tony's best-selling products, including his #1 personal and professional development program of all time, Ultimate Edge. The Breakthrough app also includes interactive features like a journal to track your progress and the all-new Wheel of Life, a free assessment test that shows you where you are today in each of the 7 areas of your life, so you know with certainty what you need to focus on to achieve an extraordinary quality of life in all areas. Download the free Tony Robbins Breakthrough app today. Get yourself on track to the life you desire and you know you deserve. Now available in the App Store and in Google Play. Building a better business starts with building better relationships. The relationships you have with your employees, your customers, your vendors, your colleagues, your investors, these can all help you build social capital. And social capital can become one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal because it creates a level of trust, understanding, and even loyalty that lets your business thrive even in uncertain times. In short, social capital is power. So how do you go about building these kinds of successful relationships? It all starts with communication. And communication is not just about what you say or what you write. In fact, words themselves have little to do with the message that people send and receive. Research shows that nearly 93% of what you're saying has to do with your nonverbal cues and gestures. Your posture, your hand gestures, your facial expressions, the way you hold yourself, the way you enter a room. Each of these seemingly innocuous notions has the potential to communicate very specific attributes about who you are as a person. Are you secure and confident? Are you warm and approachable? Or are you insecure? Are you aloof? This is just how human beings are wired. We're innately inclined to make sweeping judgments and inferences from body language. And those judgments can ultimately influence meaningful life decisions, like who we choose to employ or who we choose to engage with. So, understanding how our nonverbal signals influence our relationships, our interactions, and our abilities to get what we want in life may just be one of the best skills we can acquire. In this episode, we sit down with Jordan Harbinger. A Wall Street lawyer turned talk show host, Jordan is widely regarded as an expert in social influence, interpersonal dynamics, and social engineering. He's the owner and co-founder of The Art of Charm, a consulting and coaching company, as well as a top 50 podcast on iTunes, which he's been hosting for over a decade. Jordan's company, The Art of Charm, holds boot camps and training sessions for companies and individuals that want to learn the elements of emotional intelligence to become more persuasive, confident, and charismatic. Jordan, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I think our audience would love to hear a little bit about your background in your own words.
Sure. So essentially what I do is ask brilliant / I guess you could say smart people interesting questions so that my audience can apply that same wisdom for themselves. Fancy word for saying talk show host, but this wasn't like wake up on my mom's couch one day and decide I should start a show. I went to college in Michigan, grew up in Michigan like yourself, and ended up going to law school kind of by default plan, where by that I mean tried to get a job at Best Buy with a 4-year college degree. They weren't really hiring at that point, and this is a booming market. This is 2003. Should have been able to get a job, especially at a retail place with a 4-year college degree, but kind of couldn't make it. And so went to law school to both buy time and to buffer the old resume, because I thought, wow, if I can't get a job after graduating from the University of Michigan at Best Buy, I am in trouble. And I just followed blindly the advice that I'd make a good lawyer because my aunt, who was a teacher, said you like to argue, which is, by the way, not a good reason to go to grad school.
Absolutely not.
No. And I became a lawyer, worked on Wall Street for a while, And while I was there, I got hired by this guy named Dave. And Dave was a guy from Brooklyn with a tan. So, he knew something that other people didn't. And he was a young partner, and everybody thought he was the man. And I never saw him in the office. And that was really mystifying for me because as a lawyer, and those of you out there who are attorneys, I mean, we know we bill in 6-minute increments. That's basically how it works. And so if you work on a problem for 18 minutes, you bill 3 increments and it costs X number of dollars depending on your level in the firm. And Dave was never in the office, so it was kind of mystifying how this partner was billing hours if he's just never there. I mean, we're supposed to be workhorses. So one day I asked him why he was never in the office, which is not really a good career move generally, asking your boss at Starbucks why he's never at work. But I needed to know. I needed to figure out what was going on with him. And he told me, well, I bring in all of the deal flow. I bring in a lot of the deals for our firm, especially for our department. So I'm more valuable outside the firm than inside the firm. And this was really, really interesting for me because my thoughts on networking, relationship development, getting to the top of the law game all involved either being smarter than everybody or outworking everybody, which is nearly impossible on Wall Street. I mean, everybody's smart. Everyone's sleeping under their desk, working 20-hour days. So he sort of showed me this almost secret third path, to put a little hyperbolic spin on it, sort of a secret third path, which is if you develop relationships and you get a book of business, you can kind of write your own ticket. And nobody seemed to be paying attention to that at that time. And so I dedicated my life basically to learning that, which is eventually what evolved into what is now the art of charm. It started as me trying to get ahead on Wall Street and in the legal profession, and ended up with a sole focus on relationship development, networking, and things like that.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's just this whole idea of adding more value, and you don't have to be grinding, right, and putting in all the hours. And I think a lot of contractors now, talking about where jobs are going, a lot of people now are working more on a project basis where it doesn't matter how much time you're putting into something, but if your deliverable, if your end result is adding to the bottom line of the business, then you can charge whatever you like, right?
Exactly. And it becomes this sort of professional baseball player type situation where the rarest talents in the firm are not smarts. They're not work hours put into a day. Like if you work at certain low level jobs, like when I worked at a movie theater, I got paid hourly. I was 17, 16 years old. I got paid hourly. And my value was working extra hours, selling gummy bears and or scraping those same gummy bears off of seats, floors, and the screen when little kids spit them out and threw them and stepped on them, right? I mean, that's your value. But when you start to look at higher level careers, positions, jobs, if you're working in a company that's promoting you up to C-level or even upper management, you start to realize, wait a minute, my value is no longer trading time for money. It's no longer commoditized. I'm able to get leverage, but that leverage, unfortunately, is almost always relationship based. And most of us, I should say, this is the unfortunate part, that the relationship based stuff can be good news or bad news depending on how prepared you are. The unfortunate part is that most of us are not prepared for that switch. And we find out when we're in the legal game, maybe just below the partner level. And it's like, how come Tom got promoted over me? I've been here 3 years longer. Well, he brought in a bunch of business last year because XYZ and he got some deals. So, and you're just thinking, oh, wait a minute, that's what I got to start doing. So you start doing it a decade into the game, and that's bad for you if you're competing against people who started 10 years before you. Imagine the skills that you learn in a decade and the relationships that you create over 10 years. It's very, very hard to catch up if you just got wind of that strategy.
Yeah. And so to add more value in that way, right, to be bringing in more business, a lot of people think that is a skill set that only a certain number of people have, right? So people who work in sales, people who work in business development, they're the ones, they're hustlers. They can go out, they can build their network, they can make asks of people and feel comfortable doing so. But is one of the things that your podcast strives to do, are you attempting to give everybody sort of an equal footing and provide them with the tools and the skills they need to do it, even if they don't feel like they're naturally inclined toward that skill set?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. There's a book by Susan Cain. It's called Quiet, the Power of Introverts. And we just interviewed her on The Art of Charm as well. And what she's showing is science-based evidence that introverts are actually better in many ways at creating relationships, whereas the outgoing, gregarious, salesy type guy life of the party might be really good at making lots of relationships. A lot of them don't go that deep, and a lot of them tend to be one-sided. This isn't universally true, of course. This is just a generalization. But what introverts have going for them is, although they might seem shy, bashful, they might seem like they don't want to go out. You might feel that way if you're introverted a little bit, or so inclined that you don't want to go out and be schmoozy. What we find is that when introverts are ready to create and maintain relationships, they think deeply, they observe people well, they get to know people and develop really strong rapport. And so their relationships tend to be stronger and more focused than people who just run through a venue, rip through a conference, handing out business cards and leave with a giant email list of people that they can't remember. And so what we try to do at the Art of Charm is not only give everybody equal footing, but show you how you can leverage your unique strengths. So if you feel introverted, but you're a creative type, we'll show you how to leverage that. If you're outgoing and gregarious, but you feel like your relationships are maybe shallow or one-sided, we can address that. So there's not sort of one phenotype, genotype person, archetype, I guess we should say, that is going to be naturally better at creating and maintaining relationships. Each type of person has their own advantages and disadvantages. Even if you think, oh, I'm so shy, I could never do this. The truth is you can do it. You just haven't learned how. And learning how might seem scary, but so is learning how to go up on stage and give a talk. Very few people would say, I could never go on stage and give a talk. It's impossible for me to learn that. There are very few people who have that kind of fixed mindset, especially if they're listening to the Tony Robbins podcast. I would like to think everybody listening knows that at some level they can learn and master any skill that they want. They just have to put in the work.
Yes, for sure. I mean, that's definitely something that everybody has in common who works with Tony, is that they all believe that achievement actually is like a science, right? And so there are certain formulaic steps that you can take in order to achieve the things that you'd like. So what are some of the most basic skills and steps then? And I know you have them broken down into different types of people, and what are the things, some of the things that they can achieve and the skills that they need to work on depending on what kind of person they are. But what are some of the techniques that everyone should master?
Sure. So definitely nonverbal communication. We're talking about body language, vocal tonality, eye contact, the way you sit, stand, walk, talk, those types of things. The nonverbal aspects of communication are extremely important, and they're very underrated. Everybody knows, oh yeah, important to have good body language, stand up straight or whatever. That stuff is very basic. But what I think a lot of people don't realize, and here's just one example, our first impression is not made when we decide to make it. It's not the first thing we say. It's not the first thing that comes out of our mouth. It's not the way we introduce ourselves. None of that tends to be, in most cases, our first impression. Our first impression is made when we become a blip on other people's radar. And so an example of this might be, let's say you're at a conference and you've gone through the talks and everything, and you go down to the hotel bar. And it's downstairs, and you walk in downstairs, you're going to meet some people you knew earlier, and so they're seated on the right. You see them seated on the right. And there's another group of people seated on the left that you would like to get to know, maybe a couple of the speakers that you really admire. And so you're walking around, you're hanging out with your friends or the people that you knew in the corner there. And then eventually later on in the night, you've had a drink or two, and you walk over to that group on the left that you want to meet. Well, you introducing yourself and saying, hi, my name is Jordan, my name is Anna, Carrie, whatever, that's not your first impression. That's your introduction. But those people have already seen you around the conference. They saw you walk into the bar after the events were done. They saw you hanging out with your friends. They saw the way that you interacted with them, the way that other people interacted with you. And that formed your first impression. And I know you, just by virtue of you being female, women are typically better wired for this because of certain evolutionary psychology, the safety factor in dating and mating and relationships and things like that. So I know you've experienced this where someone has at some point in your life approached you to start a conversation for any reason, and you've already decided, I will engage this person in conversation, or no way, check please, right? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think it's something too that maybe this is something that people is more of a modern problem, but we also watch carefully to see how many times somebody is looking at their phone. Because for us, that's a safety measure, right? It's a way that we know that somebody feels uncomfortable or in a social setting is if they're constantly checking their phone. So we kind of gauge that. We have a little ticker in our head. And so we know before anybody speaks to us kind of how comfortable or uncomfortable they are in that situation.
Yeah, those little tells that people think aren't really making an impression and that no one's paying attention to, those can make us or break us. And so if you're walking into a venue and you're on your phone the whole time because you're waiting for your friends instead of being social with the people around you, well, maybe you are just trying to coordinate logistics with a group of people who got lost. But people who are looking at you, they're always going to fill in the blanks with whatever's in their mind. We use our own emotional filters to decide how we feel about something. We use our own experience. So sure, you could look at that same guy or gal and go, oh yeah, maybe they're waiting for their parents because they're visiting them in town and they got lost. But more than likely, you're not going to assume that. You're going to go, wow, that person's really awkward. And then if they get near you and try to talk to you, you're going to go, oh, the awkward guy was on his phone all night, is drunk, and he's talking to us, or whatever, right? Whatever the situation is, you're always going to assume what's going to provide you the most safety or what's going to take care of your needs first.
Sure. Yeah. You pre-frame people in a way that's going to make you feel comfortable.
Exactly. You pre-frame people in a way that's going to make you feel comfortable and make you feel safe and is frankly just going to be more convenient for you. Our brains are energy economizers. They don't want to do too much work. They're not going to sit there for half an hour looking at all the potential reasons why somebody might be doing something. They're going to stick to Occam's razor and go with the simplest explanation. And that's really bad for those of us that don't know how or don't realize that we are being perceived non-verbally the entire time by everybody who can see us. And this happens subconsciously. It's not that everybody's out there, because I can see shy people right now cringing and recoiling in horror as they think that everybody is judging them 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
This is a subconscious process. It does happen 24/7, but luckily we can make sure that these impressions are made correctly. We can rescue poor impressions if we need to. And also, since it's happening at a subconscious level, it's not necessarily going to be so indelible that it ruins any chance you have of a lifetime success because you don't have great, let's say, nonverbal communication or body language. But what it will do is hamper your efforts to create and maintain relationships that are beneficial to you. And that goes for business, that goes for your personal life. This stuff is so important. And just one sort of tell is how people are perceived nonverbally, especially when they think other people can't see them.
Right. I mean, there's also this idea too that there is such a thing as being perceived as overconfident, right? We're talking about the
Oh,
shy
yeah.
person, but there's also a judgment that comes with people who are behaving in a way that you might think of as arrogant.
Right. And so let's sort of dissect that because this is really interesting. When we typically say somebody is being perceived as overconfident, what we actually mean, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I actually mean when I say that is this person wants us to think they're confident because they're really, really not.
Oh, sure.
And
They're overacting. Yeah.
right. That's the person who's taking up way too much space, right? They've got their foot on one chair, their arm around another seat, they're leaned way back, their stuff is spread out all over the place. And we're like, okay, buddy, we get it. You feel really comfortable in this place and you're the alpha guy. Like it's just kind of an eye roll moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you see that, especially when it's somebody who is really doing this at all times. They're always puffed up. They're always doing this sort of head nod bro stuff with men. And it's typically really, really off-putting because all we think of is, wow, you're overcompensating so much. I don't want to deal with your insecurity. And again, this is a subconscious process. A lot of people don't realize that they're doing this. And a lot of people who are perceiving this don't really know why they don't like someone. They just know that they don't like them. And that's bad news because that means that we can't just ask our friends for feedback a lot of the time because our friends don't really know or see the same thing that other people do that's causing us problems in this area.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just thinking for a moment about how when people are doing something that they're very passionate about or they're feeling very comfortable and they authentically are feeling confident, they might be giving off some of the same cues that could be construed as somebody, in the position that you just mentioned.
It can happen, but it's exceedingly rare
Mm.
because our bodies are really, really terrible at lying.
Mhm.
We're really good at making up tall tales and spinning webs of lies, right? As humans, if we can imagine it, we can create it, we can write it on paper. That's why fiction is so strong and popular. We can lie through our teeth. The problem is to lie convincingly by having your body match what's coming out of your mouth. That people win awards for that and make tens of millions of dollars doing it on camera. It's very, very hard. We know when bad acting is happening in front of us because we see it and we roll our eyes and we think, how did this person ever end up in this movie? This person's ridiculous. It's very, very, very tricky to do that. That's why police are very good at interrogating people when they need to. Lie detection is an art, not a science. But when we come towards this nonverbal communications sort of set up the string of cues that we're looking for, we don't necessarily have to be able to articulate why we know somebody is full of it, but we are very, very good just as humans of detecting when someone's body is lying. I don't mean we're good lie detectors. Most people are terrible. I mean, we are very good at reading nonverbal communication because it evolved well before language did. And we're very good at understanding spoken language, especially our native language. So imagine what we can do with hundreds of thousands of years earlier, having been only able to read nonverbal communication. We're evolved to read that much more strongly than natural language. So if you need a comparison, think how much of what I'm saying that you're understanding right now, you're able to read much more than that nonverbally. It's just that you don't think about it.
So, what are some of the gestures or some of the things that you do with your body that other people observe that you think are that you think can give off a good impression? Like, so what are some of the guidelines that you would give people?
A lot of it has to do with comfort, and this is sort of nebulous. So let me explain here and dive in a little bit. What I mean by comfort is you sort of touched on this earlier, actually, that a lot of people, when they're thinking about something that they enjoy or a relationship that's they're fond of, they might have confident or authentic gestures and authentic body language that might some people might misconstrue. I wouldn't necessarily totally agree with that, although I think I know what you mean by that. I think that when we are looking at somebody, we're trying to decide whether or not they're comfortable in their own skin. Coming to what you talked about earlier about mirroring and things like that, we naturally do mirror other people, even if whether we're trained in this stuff or not. We naturally mirror other people, especially their emotional states. More so than their body, we mirror their emotional states. So if someone comes up to us and they're uncomfortable, if for any reason, they could have something going on at home. It doesn't matter. We're not looking at those circumstances. We're not even trying to figure that out. All we know is that they're uncomfortable. What happens in our body is we become uncomfortable. And this is a problem, classic example. This is a problem for dating because a lot of people, when they're talking with someone they don't know that they're interested in, they become nervous because they're really focused on the outcome. They want the other person to like them. Same thing in a business job interview. We want the other person to like us. This makes the outcome very dear to us. And when that happens, there's a lot more at stake in the conversation. That can make some people nervous. And when you get nervous, the other person may well become nervous as well, and they don't know why. So if you're in a job interview situation, sure, you assume the interviewee is nervous. If you're at a party with a bunch of your friends and the other person is making you nervous, all you know is that the other person is making you feel nervous and you're not sure why. And that is enough to get someone to say, well, I think I'm going to go refresh my drink and not come back to the conversation because they're not thinking, well, Anna's a little bit nervous talking to me right now. Maybe she's interested in me. Well, maybe not. Or maybe she has something going on at home. All I'm thinking is creepy, right? And I wander away because all I
Yeah.
know is how I feel. I don't know why and I don't care. And so we have to be very cautious when it comes to our comfort level. And of course, the way that we become comfortable in our own skin is through practice, experiential learning, things like drills, exercises, exposure therapy. And Tony does a lot of this stuff as well in some of his training that I've seen and heard, which is getting people to go through certain drills, experiences, exercises. I mean, the fire walk is almost a classic example as well of showing people that they can do something that they previously thought was maybe impossible. And it changes your emotional state. And I know you guys are big on state change, so I won't beat this topic to death. But when you can be in that comfortable, optimum state, not necessarily super energetic state, but a comfortable state, in an area where most people are uncomfortable, you have a massive, massive advantage. That's why we're attracted to leaders that can speak well in public, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And one of the big skills that we're always trying to teach our audience is how to control your state, right? But in order to have a skill, you have to have, like you said, exercises to practice it, to master it. So if you have, say, a big pitch coming up, a big business pitch, or you're giving a presentation, or you have a date that you're really looking forward to, you met somebody that you're feeling nervous, but you also feel like you want to go in with your best face. So, what are some small things that you can do in the days or hours or minutes leading up to that sort of nerve-wracking event that will help you practice and then master that skill of being naturally confident?
Sure. So this is something that I think a lot of people should do, even if they don't have something coming up in the immediate future. This is called the doorway drill. And this goes back to the whole idea that your first impression is made whether you want to make one or not when you become a blip on other people's radar. Our nonverbal communication being so crucial, what we find is that if there's an event, a date, a meeting, a presentation coming up, we start to go, okay, so when I get up there, I'm going to stand up straight and I'm going to hold my body like this and I'm going to point to my slides and I'm going to have the clicker in this hand, etc. When I'm going to walk up there like this, or when I go to get that award, I'm going to walk up, smile, shake their hand, turn around, raise the award, right? We're choreographing.
Yeah, that's too many things. People can only handle a certain number of things at one time. That's way too many things.
Exactly. And even if all we're thinking is, all right, I'm going to keep it simple, stand up straight and smile the whole time. What happens is that when we're in an interaction, let's say we're doing this live on television, this very same interview, if I'm thinking, sit up straight and smile, sit up straight and smile, what happens is I start focusing on my nonverbal communication to the point of it being difficult for me to stay present and focus on the conversation, focus on you, focus on reacting to you. And so my brain will go, well, all right, I need to focus on the interviewer here, relax and stop thinking about consciously, stop thinking about nonverbal communication. What happens at that point is we default to the level of our training. We never rise to the level of our expectations. We always default to the level of our training. And this is kind of a special forces maxim that we hear a lot. And what I mean by that is if I'm being interviewed live on television by yourself, for example, and I'm thinking about my nonverbal communication, I stop being present. And if I decide, okay, I got to focus on the interview or I got to focus on Anna here, what ends up happening is my nonverbal communication goes right back to the default of what it is by habit, which for many of us / most of us is not going to be that good when we've got hot studio lights on us or when we're on a stage giving a talk or accepting an award. And so we at AOC, we have the doorway drill. And what this is essentially and don't do this if you're driving right now because I don't want any responsibility for that. But if you stand up straight, you have your chin up, your chest up, your shoulders back, and a smile on your face. You don't have to do this in an exaggerated way because you'll look a little bit ridiculous, and we're trying to avoid that here. But if you create that open, positive body language, chin up, chest up, open, shoulders back, smile on your face. If you do this, every single time you walk through a doorway, even in your own house, and I mean when you get up to go to the restroom, when you go to your office, when you go to visit somebody, when you go to Starbucks, every time you walk through a doorway, you do this. What this does over time, and it's never as fast as we want, but it's never as long as we think it'll take either. If you do this over time, it relegates our nonverbal communication, at least the aspects of having open, positive body language, it relegates that to the level of habit. And when it's a habit, we no longer have to think about it consciously. And when we don't have to think about it consciously, what that means is our cognitive resources are freed up to think about, all right, focus hard on what she's saying. All right, we're in the middle of a debate here. Make sure I've got my counter arguments on deck while I'm still listening. You can't do all of that and look like you're confident and comfortable in your own skin, because you end up with that awkward side lean that people do when they're trying to look comfortable, but really they're completely uncomfortable, out of their element, and they don't know what to say next. You know what I'm saying? When you're talking, and you see politicians do this on TV where they're leaning and they're like, I'm trying to be casual, but it's the most awkward thing ever. This is what you look like if you're trying to micromanage your nonverbal communication at the same time as you are trying to focus on something else that's equally or more important. So we want to relegate that to the level of habit as much as possible, and the doorway drill will accomplish that. And I strongly recommend people do that. It's going to take weeks before you remember to actually do it in every doorway. But what happens as a result of this, what happens is when you start going through doors, you start to straighten up and open up. And this is something that y'all teach all the time. The mind follows the body follows the mind. So if you're changing your nonverbal communication, your physical state, now we're going down that road of the Superman pose, right? This is something that...
Yeah, I was going to say it's Amy Cuddy's power pose, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The power posing type stuff, we're going down that road. And we don't have to do the Superman stuff. We just have to get our nonverbal communication to a baseline that is acceptable no matter where we are, right? And that is what the doorway drill accomplishes. And further, what this means is that next time you walk downstairs to Starbucks after you've got this down under your belt, you're going to straighten up, open up, have that open, positive body language, which is going to change the way that you treat other people. It's going to change the way that you're perceived, which is even more important. And what that means is it will change the way that people react to you, not just the way that you feel. It'll change the way that people react and treat you. And that is enormous because that is what begins the positive self reinforcement train, which is, wow, people are treating me really well. They're smiling. They're treating me like a confident, outgoing person because that's what you look like. And so you start to act that way, and that pattern reinforces itself. And over a period of months and years, that can actually change your identity at the core level. You can have a shift that says, formerly was, oh, I'm a shy person, I keep to myself. That can change that former mindset into somebody who is completely different and able to operate in those circumstances without thinking about it at all. And that you'll know that you're there because people say, well, you're naturally just so confident all the time. And you'll go, who are they talking to right now? Have that image of yourself. So this is the beginning. This is your foot in the door. By doing this doorway drill, you really are starting down the path of identity level shift. And this is really important. This identity level shift is hugely important because even if we think, oh, I don't really need that, at some point in your career or even just in your family life, I would like to think you'd like to set an example for others and be a leader.
Sure, and it doesn't have to be a huge transformation either. I mean, if you feel like you're an introvert and yet you have a big presentation coming up and you start doing this, it's those 2 millimeter shifts, right, that are going to eventually get you to the point where you need to be. Do you have any examples of this really working, like you seeing it on people that have improved greatly just from doing these things?
Yeah, absolutely. All the time. I mean, what we teach at AOC, we have live workshops and boot camps and things like that. But what we see when we do our workshops, we do a lot of video work where we videotape people. And the reason that we do that there's multiple reasons that we do that, of course. But one of the reasons that we do that is because we like to show people's progress on the first day of the workshop versus the last day of the workshop. And we have them doing the doorway drill. We have them doing body language drills the entire time that are very similar. And it is night and day. And this is after a week-long program. So you can imagine that if you keep these habits up over time, you'll see a massive shift. And this is, like you said, those 2 millimeter, I love that concept, those 2 millimeter shifts that get you moving in the right direction. So we've had some folks come in, for example, this guy, James, he came in a long time ago. And we had him doing a lot of body language drills and a lot of nonverbal communication because as somebody who was a software engineer, he sat a lot. And when sitting is like the new smoking, right? It damages pretty much every part of your physiology. So he had a rounded back. He didn't look terrible or anything, but he was a guy who sat at a computer all day. I mean, that's what he looked like. And you can tell those people when you're out and about which guys and gals those are. And so by changing his physiology, he started to change his concept, his self-concept, and his concept of what he was capable of. And once he realized he could change that, he decided, well, in that case, I'm going to lose 100 pounds because I already changed this entire self-concept in the way that I feel. And I feel confident enough that I could do that. You start to trust yourself. And he built trust in himself to lose weight. He built trust in himself to quit a job that he didn't like. He built trust in himself to start a company outside of that doing consulting. And he basically doubled his salary working on his own, started traveling and living on the road because he had never done that. He worked in a friggin' cubicle all the time doing software coding. And then he decided, well, I've done this. He got married. He started a family. And then he went, well, I think I'm ready for a new challenge. And he went and got a job at Facebook. And this isn't recently. This is years ago when working at Facebook was something that was new and cutting edge. And he started designing product for something that we use every single day.
It's incredible. Yeah, that is incredible. So Jordan, I wanted to talk a little bit about your podcast. So everybody listening, Jordan runs a podcast called The Art of Charm. That's what he's talking about when he says The Art of Charm, or AOC. And it seems that it sort of, from my perspective, it started out as something that was more like dating and relationships, but it became quickly clear that, dating and relationships is based on human behavior, social influence, how we relate to each other. So he's had, what are you at, Jordan, like 600 episodes by now?
Yeah, close to it. We've been doing it for 10 years. Actually, this month is our 10-year anniversary of doing the show.
That is insane. Congratulations. So I wanted to ask a few questions about it because I think podcasting is something that that Tony's audience is quite curious about. So, that's quite some longevity that you've achieved, 600 shows. What made you stick with it that long? I mean, are you naturally passionate about podcasting or, interviewing the greats? I know one thing that Tony really believes in is modeling, right? So if you want to be a certain way, you find somebody who has achieved greatness in that one area, and then you model them. And one of the ways of modeling, right, is to understand their techniques and their skills and what makes them tick. And it sounds like that's a lot of what you've been doing. So can you maybe talk a little bit about, the evolution of the show or some of your favorite guests?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. Guilty as charged. When we were in our mid/early 20s, we started this show and we decided, all right, let's talk about networking and relationships, which quickly evolved into what people that age are interested in, which is dating. So we focused on that for a while. And what was surprising about the discovery of dating and relationships was there's about a 90+% overlap with business relationships and nonverbal communication presenting on stage, salesmanship, and the courting/mating/dating process. The overlap there is absolutely tremendous. And so this stuff all dovetailed really, really well. And it has since evolved into something a little bit more. I hate to use the word mature because that sort of implies that we were immature back then, but let me just go out and admit it. When I was in my 20s, I was less mature than I am now. I think that's normal for every human.
Oh, please. That's completely universal. Yeah.
Right. So no shame in that game. But we started to interview the greats because of the reason, you're right, modeling and things like that. I mean, recently we had Tony Hawk, who's a pro skater. Many people think, who cares, some skateboarder? This is a guy with a $1 billion brand. He's been around forever, and he taught us a lot about the craft of mastery, of working on something even when no one else cares, why it's important, maintaining a personal brand. I mean, we got him to talk about very detailed aspects of his business. We talked with General Stanley McChrystal about who is the theater commander in Afghanistan, about making difficult decisions and modeling that process, because this is a man who has hundreds and thousands of people's lives in his hands on any given day. And he had to have a process that wasn't just, let's do this and see how it goes, because the cost was too great. And we've had persuasion and persuasion experts that have really been pioneers in their field. Robert Cialdini. We've talked with everybody from Navy SEALs to professional football players about what makes them great and what helps them make decisions, what their mindsets are. And that has been enormous for me personally. It's what the Art of Charm brand is all about. And the longevity of the show, I would say, really stems from being able to shift the topic into whatever I'm interested in. It's not just a hodgepodge of today, let's talk about Legos. Tomorrow, let's talk about skateboarding. It's not that. This show has been able to grow with the audience. And the way that it's done that is simply by growing with what is interesting to what I think is interesting to high performers of any age bracket who want to get better, are willing to apply what they learn and do the work, which is why I think it's such a great fit for both of our audiences, because it really does dovetail into, all right, you might read a lot, you might consume a lot of material. What are you applying? What are you learning? What are you taking away from it? How are you growing? And that's the mindset that I've had throughout doing the show, and that the AOC family, the AOC audience has in applying what they've learned from the show. And that's been hugely rewarding. I think that's one of the things that's really kept me going. Aside from being able to shift the brand, it's been very rewarding to get hundreds of emails every day of people who say, this got me out of a toxic relationship. This got me into a wonderful relationship. This has helped me set examples for my kids. This has helped me get a dream job, etc. I mean, when I was a lawyer, I didn't get a lot of fan mail, I guess, right?
I can't imagine. So, Jordan, question though about the future of the show, because you mentioned that, just like you were in your 20s and the show sort of evolved to sort of match what you thought both you and the audience would be interested in. This coming year, this 2017, is for a lot of people, they have a certain level of trepidation around it, right? There's just a lot of change going on politically, socially, economically. Are there some guests that you're really looking forward to, or are there certain themes that you are planning on sort of adding to the show as, say, like sort of the cultural zeitgeist has changed and is changing?
Yes, definitely planning on adding a lot of episodes about things like how to create and perfect an elevator pitch, because we know there's going to be a lot of career shifts. I mean, this isn't just because of the political or economic times. This has to do with technology, artificial intelligence. Jobs are going to be switching economies are going to be changing rapidly. People are going to be more mobile than ever, just as they have every year since probably the dawn of the industrial era. So we're going to be focusing a lot on selling yourself, selling your business in a way that's not sleazy, in a way that is mutually beneficial for everyone. So elevator pitches, networking, relationship development, influence and persuasion. And last but not least, I should say, well, far from last, really, qualifying and getting the right people into your life, because unless we've been very intentional about this during the course of our lives and our careers, a lot of us, most of us, are surrounded by mediocrity or have remnants of mediocrity in our lives, because it takes a long time to make sure that you're only surrounded with high performers and people that make you feel great and add value to your life. It's almost impossible. And so if you're kind of new to this whole I get to choose who I'm around type of situation, we have to work on screening and qualifying. And I know that Tony's fond of saying something along the lines of you only go as high as your 5 closest friends. Is that it? Am I close?
Yeah, I think it's a common phrase. A lot of people use it, but it is very much about your peer group and being around people who are going to elevate you, not bring you down.
Right. So we have to learn how to create and maintain relationships with those people, but that's only one side of the equation. We also have to learn how to sort of prune the bushes, so to speak, by getting, or I shouldn't say getting rid of, sounds a little harsh, but marginalizing or minimizing our experience and exposure to people who maybe are energy vampires, take value away from us, cause us problems, add drama to our lives. So we add very specific skill sets to that. And we're going to be coming out with things that are very, very specific with that. Generating rapport, starting conversations, making sure that you have a solid base of new friends and a network when you move to a new town is something that we're working on as well. Making sure that you have the ability to create a new network no matter where you go. Because again, people are becoming more mobile. And so this is something that we're really going to be focusing on in 2017 as well, because people have always been moving around. People have always been creating and maintaining relationships. However, now the stakes are probably higher for a lot of us. And the mobility, the relationships, the ability to create and maintain those using digital means, that stuff has exploded in the past few years. And you have to be on that curve or you're going to miss out.
Yep, that's a very good point. So regarding podcasts and some of our listeners, I know probably have been watching carefully how the popularity of podcasts has exploded. I don't know what the exact statistic is now, but I think it's growing in terms of the number of people who are listening to podcasts. And sort of wondering, if you're a small business owner, what is the best way to leverage podcasts other than on a personal level, right? So Tony has this idea of feeding your mind, and you should constantly be using your extra time. If you're commuting or waiting online, you should constantly be feeding your mind. And podcasts are a great way to do that. But if you are a business owner and you're thinking about, let's say you're being asked to be on a podcast, you're thinking about launching one, or you're thinking about running commercials on one, what are some ways that you should be thinking about it to grow your business? Or should you be thinking about it? That's kind of the other question.
Sure. So let's address each one of these sort of individually. Going on podcasts as a business owner, great idea for multiple reasons. One, exposure, sure, why not? But what this does that I think a lot of people don't think about, especially if you run a large company and you're thinking, look, most podcasts only have a few thousand listeners or a few 100,000 listeners at the most. I like exposure, but I can get on TV. That's fine. The exposure is not for everybody. You might not care. However, what podcasting does give you the ability to do is be interviewed by dozens/hundreds of people until you're pretty good at fielding those questions. You're good at surprises.
It's amazing training.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, coming from me, I was a live broadcaster on Sirius XM satellite radio for 3.5 years. That was sort of jumping straight into the fire. But I'll tell you, since then, I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews where I've been the interviewee on the show, not just interviewing other people. And the experience has been amazing. When I go and give talks now on stages to C-level executives, and you know how those guys and gals are, they like to fire back. I never have a problem with it, but it would have been a living nightmare before I had hundreds of hours of experience being interviewed by other people who are maybe trying to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in there. So even if you think, oh, I don't even do the media for my company, or I don't need the exposure, all my business is online, whatever you think the reason, look at it from a learning, the sort of skill set acquiring viewpoint of do I want to get good at taking questions that I haven't heard before in real time? And podcasting is a great way to do that. You don't need a PR person to book you. If you make a flub, it's not on the Today Show in front of a few 100,000 people or a few million people. The repercussions are minimal. If something goes wrong, almost no podcasts are live, so you can edit out flubs, sneezes, coughs, or disasters. It's a really, really good practice run. It's a really, really good training gym for that particular skill set.
Yep. And also looking at cost savings, if you ever look carefully at any PR proposals from agencies, you'll always see a section in there on media training. And it's essentially exactly all of the skills that you would learn just from practicing by going on podcasts. And it carries a hefty fee. So it's definitely something you could save right there.
Right. It not only are you going to get media training for $1,000 an hour, you're going to end up getting it from somebody who doesn't actually interview people themselves most of the time.
Yep.
So they're kind of winging it. It's the difference between when I was in grad school, we had these mock interviews for law firms, and they were ridiculous because somebody who's never hired anyone or has only hired a few people will run you through a few questions that are totally different from what you're actually going to get at a real interview, and the stakes are low. You're doing it like a conference room in your law school. It's insane. What you really need is the real deal as much as you can. You need to simulate this as much as possible. There's a reason that in military training and boot camp, you don't just watch videos about people going into battle. You go through crazy hard drills because it's going to be that hard, right? You have to train hard and fight easy, not the other way around. So it's definitely a great way to get that experience. The other thing that I think podcasts are great for, and I'm going to throw a major caveat in here, is getting the word out about your business and getting exposure. However, and I know this is going to be controversial, I think that if there are 10 people in front of me right now saying, I'm thinking about doing a podcast, 9 of them should immediately forget about doing a podcast. It's not something that you have to do. It's not like being on Facebook or Twitter where, you know how when you look for a business, you go, well, let me search for them and look at the menu for this restaurant, for example, on a website. If they don't have a website, you kind of go, what? How does this place not have their menu online? That's weird, right? It's strange. That's not how it is with podcasting. It's not going to become that way either. It doesn't make sense for most businesses to have their own show. It really doesn't. If you are looking for a specific business, you're not necessarily looking to hear 12 hours of content from the founder. The content itself has to stand alone, regardless of whether or not somebody ever does business with you. That's very different than a brochure. It's different than a business card. It's different than having a Twitter account for your customer support. It's different than having a Facebook page. Having a podcast in iTunes is not a placeholder. It's not a place people expect to reach you. It is unidirectional for the most part in the way that people interact with you and your brand. Further, even if people don't agree with that, doing a podcast is not scalable. If you are hosting a show and you own a business, and then in a year you go, well, you know what? I kind of want somebody else to host this for me because I'm really busy. Well, sorry, you're the host. You develop the rapport with the audience. If you switch now, you're going to end up in a situation where people go, I don't really like this guy or this person as much as I like the original. Or, oh, the owner is too cool to talk to us now, us lowly peons, right? It's like YouTube. It's like a video. You can't switch yourself out. It's not a blog with written content where you can hire writers and scale it. If you need one blog post a day, maybe you could write it. If you need 10 a day, you're not going to do that. You're going to hire help. But if you're doing one podcast a month and then suddenly you want to go up to weekly because of the ROI, well, guess what? You just made a new job for yourself that you cannot give to anyone else. And third, when it comes to this, there are a lot of issues, in my opinion, with the quality and performance of most podcasts. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is being on mic, this is a show. This is a performance. This is a skill set that takes a long, long time to learn. We've all heard terrible interviews. We've all heard bad journalism, bad podcasting. This is a skill that takes a long time to learn and master. If you're not willing to dedicate yourself to that, you're actually doing harm to your brand by being that awkward guy who goes on and talks about, I don't know, what type of business are we in? Car sales. You can do harm to your brand if people think, oh, this clown, if they didn't know you before. And it's very, very hard to get good at the skill of performance. That's why not everybody is a performer. That's why not everybody's a public speaker. That's why not everybody acts in movies and television. It's a skill. And podcasting is the same way. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think it's like talking on the phone. Oh, I can do that. So of course I can record my own voice. It's not the same thing. And if you don't realize that and you start a show thinking, I'm just going to yammer on and see what happens, you're going to see negative results, not just no results. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to test it. You can see negative results.
Yeah. There are a lot of things you can test when it comes to marketing and PR. This is not one of them.
This is not one of them. It's going to be very, very difficult to do that because you will see, and we've seen this before. I'm trying to analogize this in a way that makes sense to people who are not experienced with digital media. And I think one great example might be if we're all sitting in a room and there's 100 of us and I go up and give a talk and then you go up and give a talk and then Tony comes up and gives a talk and everyone's like, wow, this public speaking is really engaging. I should do that. But you've never given a talk. Do you think you should go up there on stage and just wing it?
No, don't be that guy. Yeah.
Don't be that guy, right? You would never do that if you're sitting in an audience. You'd never want to follow an experienced speaker, try to wing it with no content, no presentation. You would just never do that. However, there are hundreds of thousands of people in iTunes and other podcast distribution centers right now that are going, oh, I'm just going to record some random stuff and throw it up there. That's the equivalent of walking in right after somebody's heard an amazing speech by a professional and saying, well, I hope this doesn't embarrass me, and going up and embarrassing yourself and just wishing that you had never done that, except now it's on the internet and you don't realize how other people are reacting because you can't see them. That's negative results. That's negative branding. You would never do that to yourself deliberately, and yet there's this trend that says podcasting is the new digital gold rush, and it's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can be a digital gold rush in the sense that there is an enormous audience, right, that is only growing on iTunes and Stitcher, and they are engaged and they're focused. And there is an opportunity, but it's through advertising and sponsorships. And that's something, speaking of marketing and PR, that is something you can experiment with. So how could a small business essentially reach and tap into that new audience for lead generation?
Sure. So one way I think that would be great is going through and being a guest on podcasts. You don't have to start with the big ones. In fact, I recommend for reasons we've previously discussed, starting with the smallest ones, because then you can get really good at being interviewed. And once you get the hang of that and you can take fire from all directions and really crush it, then you can start to work up the chain, the ladder, so to speak, in terms of audience. If you're seeing ROI by being a guest on a bunch of shows and possibly also paying and buying some advertising on shows to test that out, if that's generating ROI, then you can consider maybe I should do this myself. You should not consider doing this yourself if you just want to dip your toes in the water, because that makes no sense at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. What kinds of brands do you think are getting great ROI on advertising on podcasts?
I think brands that are getting great ROI are software as a service products and just straight up B2C products. Things like websites that advertise with us, or companies that advertise with us on Art of Charm, are things like HostGator, which is essentially you can create a website really easily, drag and drop. So small business people want it. People who just want to make sure that the first result in Google is something that's positive for them will get that. Food companies will advertise things like Blue Apron, which say, hey, $10 a meal, we'll deliver the food to your door and you can cook it and it's all healthy. They get strong ROI. Things like razor blades and things like that, those are all getting good ROI. Anything from Salesforce all the way on over to car companies. What's not getting good ROI are these sort of nebulous new services and products that don't really make sense, that are hard to explain in a radio, audio-only medium. Those are not getting ROI. And it's not good for, I would say, just straight up branding. If you are the CEO of an oil company, don't buy podcast ads. You are lighting your money on fire. Actually, you might get more ROI by lighting your money on fire than you would running branding ads in podcasts, except in shows that are geared towards the oil and gas industry. So people have to be smart about it. And I've noticed that a lot of traditional ad agencies are absolutely not smart about it at all. I don't want to blow up any sponsors, but I will tell you, we have had some ads on the Art of Charm where I just go, what are they doing? I mean, I'll cash the check, but what is wrong? Why would you advertise this on a podcast? It makes no sense. It's kind of like saying, this thing you can't see is really beneficial. I can't really tell you how it works either, but you should go to this website and check it out. It's just not going to generate anything. And I think a lot of big ad agencies are falling victim to the exact same thing that a lot of small business people are becoming a victim to in podcasting, which is, I've got to be in there somehow. So let's throw money at the problem and that is not a good idea. It's just not. It reminds me of, it's kind of the equivalent of buying Twitter followers or buying Facebook fans or something. It does nothing. It's a vanity metric to go, well, I had an ad on The Art of Charm. I had an ad on the Tony Robbins podcast. It's great for 30 seconds. Then you just go, wow, that cost me like 20 grand. I don't know if that was a good investment.
That's a good point. Well, Jordan, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's always fun. And if people are listening to podcasts and they're looking for something similar to this show to listen to, I would be honored if people would check out The Art of Charm. It's in iTunes and at theartofcharm.com. And just check out the free stuff, and hopefully it'll change your life. That's what it's there for.
Great. Thanks so much, Jordan.
Thank you.
The Tony Robbins podcast is directed by Tony Robbins and hosted by Anna Jorg. Carrie Song is our executive producer. Tyler Culbertson is our associate producer. Jamie Carvajal and Adriel De La Torre are our digital editors. Special thanks to Diane Adcock and Mary Buckheit for their creative review. Copyright Robbins Research International.